Hi, welcome to Cryptid Wilderness Research. I am CWR team member Daniel Becker in Anchorage, Alaska. Joining me, as always, is my fellow host from Quincy, Washington, Matt Slater.
Hello.
Joining us tonight, a special treat, three ladies that have the uniqueness of being one of the only, if not the only, that I know of, all-female cryptid research groups. Joining us tonight is Sisters of the Moon. First, Miss Debbie Porch, and also Barbara Locke and Sandy Hoyle. Ladies, thank you so much for being with us.
Sandy Harris.
Oh, Sandy Harris.
It's
Okay.
not your fault. I know that my old Skype account said Hoyle.
Oh, got it. Okay.
It's Harris.
Okay, I stand corrected. Sandy Harris. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Debbie, let's get started with you. Why don't you tell us your story and how you got interested in the topic of cryptid research?
Well, I suppose it was because when I was very young, I lived in Malta, Texas, and that's pretty deep East Texas. And we lived out in the country, and we had strange stuff happening on our property. Sometimes, when I was probably 10, 12 years old, I'd always follow my daddy around, and my mama was sick with, oops, I'm sorry, I hit the table. Sick, having an earthquake here. She had cancer, and so she was always, in the house, and I would follow daddy around and help him around the outside. And I know we had killed a possum one time, and he had put it in a metal trash can and put the lid on it and then put a great big rock on top of it because we were going to come back out the next day because it was late in the evening. We were going to bury it the next day. And so when we did go back out there the next day, he took the rock off. And I mean, it was a big rock. It was, this big and about like that, rectangle. And it was heavy, too heavy for me, especially. But he took the rock off and took the lid off. And then he looked at me after he looked into the trash can and he was like, "What'd you do with it?" And I was like, "What?" He said, "It's not here." I said, "I didn't touch that thing." I mean, I was a country girl, but I was a female, and I was like, "There's no way I would have touched that." And I looked in there and it was gone. And that was weird. Of course, back then we had heard tell of the Fouke monster. That's what we called it. Because Fouke, Arkansas was only about 30 miles or so as a crow flies from where we lived in Malta. But we didn't know what the Fouke monster was. We had never heard the term Bigfoot or anything about a Bigfoot. We didn't have computers back then. But anyway, so we just kind of dismissed that as strange. And then later that year or the next year, I can't remember, my mama was, in bed still. She's sick. And my daddy and I were on the front porch hanging Christmas lights. And they were the blue Christmas lights, where it's painted on the inside, old school Christmas lights.
Yeah.
And we had started on one end of the porch, working our way to the other, and it wasn't that wide. And we had a carport at the other end. And the only light we had out there at the property was back behind the house. And so it was dark. It was really dark. We had the front porch light on, and that was it. And we had started on the right-hand side of the house, and we didn't get quite to the middle. And as we're working our way down, we heard this. The only way I described it back then was it was a growl, moan, roar all together. But it was coming from the dirt road that was out in front of our house. But it was over to the left, which my mama lived right next to us in a little bitty wooden house. And it was more like directly out in front of her house. Well, when we heard it, my daddy stopped and we both looked in that direction and he goes, "What was that?" And I was like, "I don't know what that was, Daddy." And I was scared because I'd never heard that before. And I said, "Let's go in the house." And he's like, "No, just keep on working. We need to finish these." And so we started working a little bit more, just not very long afterwards, just 2 or 3 minutes later, we heard that again. But this time it was closer up towards us. it seemed like it was in front of my mama's house, like coming towards us. And he told me, he goes, go in the house and get my gun. Well, now that scared the daylights out of me because my daddy
Right.
was a Vietnam War veteran, a World War II war veteran, and a Korea War veteran.
Wow.
And he had never been scared of anything. And so when he said, go get my gun, I knew it was serious. And so I started crying and I was like, no, Daddy, come in the house. You come in the house with me right now. And while we're arguing about me going in and leaving him out there, which I didn't want to do, from our carport, which was just a few feet to our left, we heard that same sound again. And Daddy pushed me into the house at this point, and my mama was in bed. Right as you come in the front door, you went into her bedroom, and she was in the bed, and I'm crying, and she was like, what's going on? And I'm trying to explain to her this sound that we heard out there. And Daddy went past us into this little other bedroom where he kept the gun hidden from me. And then came back out, went out in the front, back out, and I'm begging him not to go. And Mama's like, what is it? And I'm like, I don't know, it's a monster. And I'm just bawling like crazy. And I go, he had a flashlight and the gun, and he started in the carport. Now I'm going in my bedroom, which was right next to the carport, and I'm looking out the window, following him from window to window all the way around that house, because I just knew something was going to get him. And then he comes back in the house and he said, call your Aunt Overly, which was my mama's sister that lived just on the other side of the road, about, I don't know, it wasn't very far from us. I could walk to her house. And she had lived there forever, her whole life. And we had just moved there from Mesquite, Texas, probably 4 years earlier. And so I called Aunt Overly, and I'm on the phone with her, and I'm making all these sounds like what it sounded like. And she said, oh, hon, that's probably just Miss Clay Schulte's cows or bulls, that she has, which was our neighbor across the road from us that lived at an angle. And she had tons of acreage over there. And she did have cows and bulls and chickens and all that. Well, so that calmed our nerves. We were kind of new to the country scene in the last 4 years because we moved there when I was 10. And so we slept okay that night. Well, the next day, Miss Clay Schulte came down to the house because she's the one that actually gave my mama her shots for her pain medicine. And so my mama and Daddy, they were in the front room, and Daddy came over there and hollered at me and told me to come in there and to do that sound that we heard for Miss Clay Schulte. And so I'm in there roaring and moaning and growling for Miss Clay Schulte, and she's sitting there in the rocker, like this. And she goes, oh, Mr. Bob, I wish you hadn't have told me that, because she was a widow and she lived there by herself. And he said, oh, no, Miss Clay Schulte, it's all right. Overly told us that it was, which was my aunt, said Overly told us that it was probably just one of your bulls out there. And she said, oh, no, Mr. Bob. She said, all of my bulls are up in decap being neutered, spayed, whatever. And so she didn't have anything over there. And she goes, as a matter of fact, something's been killing my chickens. And so it wasn't until years later, like, computers had been created, where everybody could get one. I was an adult, had kids of my own, and I get on the computer, and by this time we had heard the term Bigfoot, and of course we thought they weren't in Texas. We thought they were out there in California. But I'm Googling or whatever. It wasn't Google back then, but I'm looking Bigfoot stuff up. And lo and behold, I hear this sound that we had heard. And so the next time I went down to where my daddy was living at that time, I was sitting there in his house, and I told him, I said, Daddy, I want to play something for me, and you tell me if you've ever heard this before. And so I pull it up and play it, the sound, and I look at him and he nods, and I said, well, have you heard it before? And he goes, good and damn well I have. And I said, well, what do you think it is? And he said, you tell me what it is, and I'll tell you what I think it is. And I said, well, they say it's a Bigfoot. And he's nodding. He goes, that's what I thought it was. And I was like, what do you mean that's what you've always thought it was? And he said, well, I wondered about that. He had heard about it long before I ever did. And anyway, so that's what got me interested. And it was at that point and that time, now that I had a laptop, I mean, a computer at the time, it was, big monitor computer back then. I started researching it on the internet and stuff. And that's how I got interested in it.
Wow, that's amazing. Um, yeah, and you were in Texas at the time, you said?
Yeah. Yeah. I lived in Texas up until October of this past year. And so I've been in East Texas pretty much my whole life.
Right. And we all know Texas is a hot spot for cryptid researchers.
Definitely.
Thank you for sharing. Barbara, let's move to you. Why don't you tell us how you got started on this journey and what you got how it became an interest for you?
Okay, well, back in the I don't know exactly when the first time they ever showed the Patty clip on TV, the late 60s, I suppose. But anyway, I saw it. So seeing that film put the thought in my mind that there was something out there. But it didn't really, I never thought anything about it because I thought they're all out west. They're out there. And, well, I thought they were all in Washington. I didn't even have a clue that where they saw it was in California. I thought they were in Washington. But anyway, that put the thought in my mind. And Sandy is actually my baby sister. And we used to be we were really interested in ghosts. We would always want to do spooky stuff. Well, Sandy had something happen around her house. And we got to investigating it and we kind of, we came to the conclusion she had some Bigfoot activity. So that was really thrilling. Well, when I moved into my home in Lamar County, Texas, and I had activity at my home there. They used to play stick games with me. They would bring me gifts. They brought me headless rabbits. They threw a deer leg on top of my house. They were always bringing me little things, horseshoes, just all kinds of things. And I was getting in contact with Sandy and telling her about this stuff that's happening at my house. And finally, I found a footprint. I don't know that you do such a thing as casting. I just found this footprint in my barn, and I'm thinking, well, this is cool because there's no little children. It was a baby size, maybe 6 inches long, and it's in my barn. And I'm talking about it to Sandy. Well, I started getting interested in looking up things on the internet and seeing what other people are saying about Bigfoot. Finally, I find a group that's having a camp out right there where I live. So I go to this camp out, and that's where I met Debbie. And there were some other ladies there, and we thought, well, we'd like to form an all-female group. And we're not the only group. Let me go ahead and just set y'all straight. We're not the only female group. There are many, and they all are good. They're all good women out there in the field. There's lots of them. But anyway, I met Debbie, and we all threw it around while we were at this meeting at the lake about forming a group. So we did, and I contacted Sandy and said, "Hey, I've met these ladies. Why don't you join our group?" So she joined our group, and we started going out in the field, and we were just greenhorns, didn't know a dang thing except they stood out there in the woods and howled and hit trees with sticks. That's all we knew.
we sure found out otherwise.
Yeah.
They did a lot more stuff.
Yeah, and we started finding out right off the bat. Even though I had been interested in Bigfoot for a long time, I didn't know much about it. And I thought people that went out in the woods to look for him were the bravest people in the world to go out there and look for these monsters, you know.
Yeah.
But dude, we got hooked right off the bat, and then you couldn't keep us out of the woods.
Well, it certainly is an addiction. It certainly is an
It
addiction.
is.
And
It is.
Matt and I are hooked ourselves.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Sandy, let's jump over to you and get your perspective.
Well, I watched the Legend of Boggy Creek when I was a little girl, and I know it petrified me, but I wasn't too worried because I knew I was in Georgia. I checked the United States map and I seen it was Arkansas. I said, I'm pretty safe, I'm sure. But uh, one night out on my patio, I lived in Georgia. Um, my son was out there letting our puppies go out the potty. I had a couple of dogs, and I was stepping outside to join him, and he was about to knock me down trying to get back in the house. And there was a creek that ran behind our house, and it was just on the outskirts of town. And even my two little dogs that thought they were mighty dogs was trying to get back in the house too. And that's kind of unusual, especially with little chihuahuas, because they think they're 10 foot tall and bulletproof. But he come in, he said, "Mom, there's something out there." I said, "What are you talking about? There's something out there." He said something just let out a huge, huge like roar scream right behind. We had a little shop out off the back of the land, but it was close to the house. It probably wasn't no more than 40 feet, 40, 50 feet. And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Mom, just stay in the house." He said, "There's something out there." He said, "I could feel it. It was so loud." I said, "My goodness, son." Well, the night went on. He was pretty shook up for a little bit. We sat down and talked for a little bit. And the next day, I went and got on a computer, and he was at the house. And I said, "Son, come over here and listen with me." I said, "Let's see if we can figure out what you heard." And I pulled up um, everything that I could think of that could possibly be in Georgia. I pulled up a coyote scream. I pulled up fox screams. Even pulled up a bear because you can get black bear in parts of Georgia, and even in South bears are down in Florida where I'm at now. And he says, "No, Mama, no, it wasn't nothing like that whatsoever." I pulled on even a lion scream, even though I knew we did not have lions in Georgia, just to see if I could even get an idea of what he was talking about. He said, "No, it wasn't that." Well, I was doing screams, rolling through Google's, and pulling them up, and I did this one for kicks and giggles. It said a Bigfoot scream howl, and I clicked on it. I didn't even tell him what I'd done. I said, "What about this one, son?" And he said, "Oh my God, that sounds a lot like it, Mom. What kind of animal is that?" And I just looked at him and started smiling. He says, "Mom, what kind of animal is that?" I said, "Google says it's a Bigfoot." And yeah, I was shocked as well. And I called Barbara. She was living in that part of Georgia with around me that time, and it sparked my interest big time. Um, because of all the sounds I possibly could pull up, he said nothing sounded like it. But he was like, "Well, Mom, I don't know why it's saying it's a Bigfoot, but that's what it sounded like."
Wow.
That's how I got started.
That's awesome. Debbie, let's jump back to you. And why don't you tell us how this wonderful research team came up with the name Sisters of the Moon? And then after that, tell us about um, some of the most memorable experiences that you've had out with the team.
Well, like Barbara said, we talked about what we were going to name ourselves or call ourselves. And when we first started out, we had 5 girls that were in the group, and one of them was a huge Fleetwood Mac. And what was her name, Barbara?
Yes.
Stevie Nicks, yeah, Stevie Nicks. She loves Stevie Nicks, and she would play the song, and we were like, Sisters of the Moon is good because we were all like sisters. already, and what we do out under the moon. I mean, that's
Very true.
when the magic happens, it's at nighttime under the moon. And we were like, we heard it and thought about it, and it was perfect. And so that's how we came up with the name Sisters of the Moon. And then, of course, Barbara and Sandy are sisters, and so that was even more perfect.
Right.
But
Yeah.
so that's how the name came about. What was the other thing that you asked me?
So tell us about some of your most memorable experiences out with the research team.
Well, I think the first time we really had an outing as a group, we found this area that we now call the killing field, because we were looking for a place to camp in Oklahoma, and it was just me and one of the other girls at the time, and we found this huge, gosh, it was several acres, 6 or 7 acres at least, and it was we were on a lake, or the river actually, that went down into a lake. So we were on the river, and it was covered in bones, just tons of bones. But we were looking for the place to camp, and we had turned around, backed into this place to turn around. And as we're backing, I look out the window and I see some bones back there, and I'm like, hold on a second. So we get out and we look, and we're like, these are deer bones. I mean, deer bones. And we thought, that's really strange that there's this many. And so we kept following the deer bones on back. The little opening we were in, we didn't realize that there was this huge piece of land back behind it, because there were these mounds of dirt that had been mounded up. And so we just kept following the deer bones, and it opened up into this, big acreage, and just tons of more deer bones.
Wow.
And I mean, I've got some of them in there in the living room even, but there were legs had been broken in half. And we were like, okay, this isn't normal.
Right.
So we got really excited, and we were like, okay, we're camping here. So we went just down the road a little bit and camped in this area. And we had a lot of stuff happen that weekend.
Yeah.
And so we started going back to that place and had a whole lot of stuff happen over the course of a few years. We call that the killing field.
Mhm.
And so that was our first. I mean, we got so lucky. That was our first real outing as a group, and we had that happen, and it was freaking. It was a big deal. And yeah, and so then we went to this other place. One of the other girls and I were looking around in the woods, and we're still in another part of Oklahoma, but we were further south from the killing field, and we were scouting locations, and we were seeing all sorts of different, what we call signs, that there are possible Bigfoot in the area. I mean, there were tree manipulations. I mean, big, huge arches that were made, but we kept noticing that branches were broke all in the same direction. It wasn't like a storm had come through there. You could tell that they were purposely broken and at the same height, but then you'd look straight on back and there'd be another one broken. So we just kept following the broken trees, and we came up to the area where there was a huge circle of trees, and they were all broken off at the same area, but it was in a big circle, and they were all broken, pointing in this other direction. So we followed that and kept going back, and we finally came up to where there was this huge open area. Of course, there were trees in there, but it wasn't as heavily treed. And there were these two, God, I don't even know how tall they were, but they were huge trees that had been completely uprooted. And I have pictures of all of this, but they had been completely uprooted and laid next to each other, but at different angles. The root ball, there was no mud, no dirt, anything. They'd been completely cleaned off of the roots, but the roots were huge and they had hardened, and they had been picked up and moved and put up in these trees, but the roots on each tree had been pushed down at an angle in the ground. And we couldn't pull, it would be just one root that would, was huge. But like I said, I've got pictures of all that. And we decided we were going to camp in this location. And so we had been asked to speak at this little conference like thing that they have up in Oklahoma. And so we decided we would all meet at an area out there, camp out there, just down the road from where we had found all this stuff, and decide what we were going to talk about in our presentations. And so the first night there, it was just going to be me and one of the other girls that used to be in our group. And then Barbara and another girl were joining us the next morning. And so this other girl, I'll call her Betty, she and I were setting up camp. And as we're setting up camp, we start hearing all this strange stuff just coming from the hill, just right there. And I won't go all into it, but we had all sorts of stuff happen. And it was starting to get dark, and we were trying to hurry up and get everything up before it got dark. And we kept hearing, it sounded like a sick chicken coming from up the hill, sounded like a whimpering dog coming from the same exact spot. A moo is what started it, and it sounded like a moo, but it wasn't quite a cow. But all these different sounds were coming from just at the top of this hill, this little ridge line where we were setting up our tent. And it was all from the same exact spot. And we already knew that there was no animals within miles from where we were at, not cows especially, And anyway, the last time we heard something, it sounded like a big growl type thing coming from up there on the hill. And that's when we really got nervous. And I said, okay, let's go into town, which was 40 miles away from us from where we were at. And I need to get some more recorders because I only had one recorder with me. And before we left, I set that recorder out. So we were going about an hour and a half because it did take us so long to get there. I came back I set out that recorder that I did have before we left. And when we got back, I set the other recorders out. We sat out in the chair, and then all sorts of other stuff happened that night. But when I listened to the recorder that I had set out, as soon as we left, it was dead silent. But as soon as we got back, it started up again. And anyway, we called that place the Tribulation Bay because we'd been asked to speak about the trials and tribulations of being a female Bigfooter. Mm-hmm. And so over the next 2 nights after Barbara and the other lady showed up the next day, that night before, we had stuff happen almost all night. And I mean, it was crazy. And on one of the recorders that I had set out, about 3:30ish, 4 o'clock, somewhere in between there, I was awake. The other girl, it had slowly started dying down. So she finally went to sleep, and I woke up hearing gibberish. I mean, it sounded like a language. And as soon as I heard it, I jumped up and I just hit her, on the back. She had her back to me. I hit her and I'm doing like this, like, can you hear that? And she nodded. And so, of course, we ended up capturing what we believe is possibly Bigfoot talking, but it sounded like there were 3 different individuals because you could tell they were interacting, talking to each other. And so we think that whole night, what we were having happen, and especially after we went in the tent, because they were hitting our tents, our tent walls, dragging stuff down the roof, either their finger or a branch or something. We think that 2 of them had been there messing with us. And then about that time, maybe the 3rd one had come in and was getting on to them, telling them, y'all need to get out of here. Because what we didn't know is right after all that died down, we finally were able to go back to sleep. But one of the other girls came up in the middle of the night, and she was sitting out there. And that next morning, when I heard her messing around outside in her vehicle, I looked out the window and I told the other girl that, she was here, and I went running out the door and I was like, where have you been? We didn't have signal, and we've been trying to message all of them saying, y'all get out here. You don't know what you're missing. And so I'm like, wait till I tell you what happened. And she goes, hold up. Before you tell me anything, let me tell you what I saw. And so she said, when she pulled in, she went past our campsite because she didn't see it at first. And then she stopped and angled back in to pull in. And so as her headlights were going around, her headlights caught something running away from what would have been my end of the tent. And she reached down to the calf of her leg and lifted her leg up like she was running. And she goes, I saw this. And she says she saw the calf of something running away from the tent. And she said it went along that ridge line and then came back up. And so I'm telling her about everything. And anyway, it was just, we call that Tribulation Bay.
Yeah.
Wow, what a great story. Great story. Barbara, let's go to you. Tell us about some of your most memorable times with the team.
Well, I guess I'll take one that kind of goes along with Debbie's story. About a little over a year later, Sandy and our niece Stephanie, that goes out with us occasionally, they joined me in Jefferson, Texas. We went to the Bigfoot conference. And Debbie had sent a pin to me and said, hey, I've been riding around down there, and I think this would be a good place for y'all to camp. She wasn't going to be able to join us that weekend, whatever it was we were there, but it was Sandy, myself, and my niece Stephanie. So we go to the conference. First we go in the woods. We go to the spot and we set up our camp. So when we get back from the conference, we wanted to do all this in the dark. So we come back from the conference probably about 11 o'clock. It's dark. It's raining. Oh my gosh, it's been raining all afternoon. And the whole time we were at the conference, we come back to the campsite, it's still raining. Well, I forgot to mention that before we left at the conference, I did put a recorder in my tent. But when we came back and it had been raining continuously, being green as I was at Bigfooting, I went in there and I turned my recorder off. Lesson learned. So Sandy and Stephanie and I were sitting in front of my tent. My tent had a little overhang that made like a little porch. It was big enough to put your little chair right there, and we didn't have to sit in the rain. And we had gotten a fire started. We were getting comfortable, getting set in for the night. Thought maybe we'd hear some Bigfoots or something. Well, Debbie had sent me the gibberish, and I had it on my phone. And I looked at my niece and I said, hey, you want to hear Bigfoot talk? And she said, yeah. So we're sitting there and I pull out my phone and I pull up this gibberish and I play it. As soon as it ends, I play it one more time. I play it 2 times immediately following each other. As soon as the second time it played, as soon as it stopped, behind us in the woods, we hear 3 loud booms. Boom, boom, boom. And it was loud. Sandy and I look at each other and we're just like, I don't know what's fixing to happen here, because you can feel something's coming up behind us. We feel it. We feel it and we can hear them coming. And there's trees on each side of our tent. And when they get up to the side of our tent, they shake these trees and all the water just pours all over us. And they cut off out in each direction and leave us. Don't bother us anymore. What we think, this is just our talk amongst ourselves. This is what we think. We think the gibberish that Debbie recorded that night at Tribulation Bay was an adult coming up on these 2 juveniles, telling them, hey, somebody's coming, you need to go. And I think these that we heard the night in Texas heard that, and they understood what it said. And they left because they thought someone was coming up. And that's one of the most memorable trips for me.
Wow,
That's pretty amazing.
that
It
is.
was.
That is. Sandy, let's go over to you. How about you? What's some of your most memorable moments with the team?
Oh my goodness, there's so many memorable moments with these 2 ladies. It's hard to pick. We have had amazing experiences when we together, including Texas, Oklahoma, and also in Georgia. There's been a lot of good stuff, but I think I'm going to go back to Tribulation Bay. It was probably about, I'm going to say, a year and a half after Debbie had the gibberish on her recordings and that wild night that she experienced there. Me, Barbara, and Debbie met, and it was right by a really big lake. It was not in a park, but near a park. And it was freezing cold that night. It was so dang cold. And it had been raining. It was just a miserable night. But before the rain got real hard, we were all sitting around Barbara's tent. And Barbara was kind of sitting inside the door of the tent, so she couldn't hear what Debbie and I had been hearing. And it sounded like almost like a motor of a semi or something off in the woods. And there's no way a truck could be there. It wasn't possible. We have a hard time getting through those roads, even in regular size pickups. I mean, pretty much difficulty getting there. So, and Debbie made the comment that that's what she heard the night of all the action there previously. She heard those sounds as well. So it it quit. We went out there and we turned on our little lights that we use around our tent, little flickering Christmas lights or whatever we use whenever we go. And it really felt eerie out there that night. Something didn't feel right, and Debbie could feel it. I could feel it. And she was going to sleep in a tent by herself, but she decided to come in, join me and Barbara, which we were teetotally good with. So Debbie come and joined us. We were settling in for the night. She put her blow up air mattress in between mine and Barbara's. I was on one complete end of the tent. Barbara was on the other. The way the tent was a little different, and Debbie had plenty of room in the middle between the two of us. Well, you could see around the tent from the lit up Christmas lights we had out there. I'm pretty sure they were white lights. And we had chairs propped up next to the tent because it had been raining and we didn't want them blown away or falling over or anything like that. So we propped them up before we went inside the tent. And I had rolled over and was facing the tent wall. And I did not realize that Debbie had rolled over and was facing in the exact same direction that I was facing. And I'd been laying there for 2 or 3 minutes just thinking about things of the night and the events that had been going on. And I seen a shadow walk right by the tent, and it looked a little too thick to be human form, but it's hard to tell with shadows, and I realized that. But whatever it was bumped one of those chairs, and as soon as that happened, I turned over just to see, hoping to God somebody else had seen what I just seen. And I looked at Debbie. I said, "Did you see that?" And she looked at me, nodded her head, yes. Well, that was just the beginning. They wanted to pull an all-nighter with us as well, whoever messed. Barbara had some coolers and things of such setting right up under like the little front porch of the tent. And whatever it was, and I'm going to say it was a Bigfoot because I believe in my heart that's what it was, kept trying to reach around and pull those tubs, but they were weighted down. It almost sounded like they were trying to pull them and grab them. They were trying to open them and it would pop down. They would try to pull them again and pop down. Well, in the meantime, me and Debbie, we're getting up out of our little beds and we're trying to peek through the vinyl lining on the tent to see what we could see. Debbie even tried to unzip it and she still couldn't see anything, but you definitely heard all this going on right here at the tent. So she kind of gets over to Barbara to try to see if she's hearing this. And we didn't know which end Barbara went to sleep on, so she's digging for Barbara, and she gets Barbara awake. And Barbara, did you say you could hear it or not?
Yeah, I could hear stuff going on.
Yeah. And anyway, so we were all three involved, and it was like we were not scaring them at all. They were being incredibly bold. They kept trying to pull on these big containers, and it sounded like they were trying to pull them, and it sounded like they were trying to pull them on gravel or something, but I don't know if they just couldn't get a good grip on it, and they were so intelligent, they knew not to come on around because they knew we could see them. I really don't know, but this went on from midnight till I know at least 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and it got to the point where it was aggravating Barbara, so she let them have it. Barbara just told them, "Leave us the hell alone."
Get the hell out of here.
That was her exact words. Get the hell out of here.
Me and Debbie just kind of looked at each other on, "Are we about to die now?"
Oh man, the look on their faces was priceless
We're like,
because they thought I had just signed their death warrant.
they quit for about the whole amount of maybe 10 minutes, and then was bold enough to start right back up again.
They went out there and started messing with Barbara's truck because she had
Yeah.
a tarp on the back of it, and I think you had wood or something back there.
I had wood and I had thrown a tarp over it because it was raining and I didn't want the wood wet. And you can hear them out there, they'll just be flapping it up and down and messing with the door handles on the truck.
They were
So-
incredibly bold.
Yeah.
But have had so many experiences over the years until we've learned that that's just their nature. They're way bolder than what a lot of people think.
They are nosy.
Very.
This
Well,
trip,
they
this
watched
is,
us.
yeah, well, this is the same place that Debbie recorded the gibberishes, the spot Sandy's just talking about.
Mhm.
And this was our very first trip ever using our twinkle lights. And we haven't stopped using them since because those lights have cast shadows on our tent.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Those were the best investment
Yes.
because we have seen shadows out there up in Georgia several times.
Louisiana.
Louisiana, yep. Oh yes, yeah. I mean, we could talk for hours, y'all.
Yeah.
So
We've had,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
we've had lots of adventures. We really have, and we've been fortunate. We don't have activity every single time we go in the woods, but we try to find some good spots and we go there and we usually have good activity. We're going to go back and see if we can get it to happen again. So that's how we end up with our good places.
So after hearing all these amazing experiences, what I'm getting from this is wherever the Sisters of the Moon go, cryptid activity is most likely to follow. So that's awesome. Let me throw the ball over to my fellow host in Quincy, Washington, Matt Slater. Let me throw the ball over that way.
Well, I'm not going to say it happens because we're there, but
We've been very fortunate.
we have, and some people think we're charmed, I guess. And we feel like we have a connection with one another because growing up as children, all three of us were having the same dream.
Yeah, we didn't know that until just a few years ago, and
Know that till a
we
couple
had
of
the same exact dreams when we were little.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're not going to talk about what that was because that's scarier.
Yeah.
Copy that. Copy that. Matt, what you got?
I just wanted to say that these stories, how you got into Bigfoot researching and your experiences are just, I wish I could have an experience out in the woods that's quarter as intense of what you've experienced. I'm blown away. All I've seen so far is one footprint. And, I believed for a long time, but like all I've ever been able to see so far, I live here in Washington and I've only seen one footprint, and that was last weekend.
We had a
And,
marvelous trip to the Olympic Peninsula. We
Yep.
were invited up to the cabin with the Olympic Project. They let us come up to their cabin. Oh, it was amazing. It's an amazing trip. We found a trackway. We were bluff charged.
Yeah, that was scary.
Yeah, Sandy looked through a thermal and she could see one holding onto a tree just going back and forth. But she didn't know she could record with the flare, so we missed that opportunity. But she did see it.
Yep.
It was a great trip. We loved it.
Didn't
We'd
they
really
all,
like to go back.
your Mardi Gras beads, Barbara? Didn't they take all those?
They took all the Mardi Gras beads, and I had some little bells hanging in the tree that they took one of them from one side and put it on the back side of the tree.
Wow, absolutely fascinating stories and experiences. We're almost out of time, so I want to ask you, ladies, what do you got coming up?
Well, we're trying to plan something back west. We're hoping we can't make any definite things on that, but we were talking about a trip back out towards Oregon and Washington. And if that doesn't come through, then Debbie and I were talking about a road trip. We would kind of like to try to go out there maybe 10 days to 2 weeks and go to different spots, get 2 or 3 different spots on a road trip and see what happens. So we haven't made it definite yet. But we're
Wow.
gonna be in the woods. We love the woods. Yeah.
It's going to be a good trip coming out here. As
Oh,
I just posted a video just in one county here in Washington, and I spent almost a whole day with my research partner, local guide here. Um, Almost a whole day just driving around up in the tops of mountains, and it was awesome. That's when we found the footprint, and I wish I knew some more techniques and things to do out there in the field.
you ever
Uh,
are you near Forks by any chance?
Near where?
Forks?
Forks, Washington.
No, I'm right in the middle. Like if you look at a
Oh,
map, I'm right in the dead center of Washington, out in
okay.
the sort of the
So,
plateau desert.
and oh, it's a desert there? Okay.
Yeah,
Are you finding stuff? Hey, I
we
think they
found
could
one
be
footprint.
anywhere. I think they're in the deserts of Texas. I really do.
Yeah,
You'd really be surprised where these creatures can habitate.
anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah, you're right.
So, Debbie, Barbara, Sandy, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your wonderful experiences. And every time that Matt and I get to interview researchers like yourselves, we always learn so much. So, thank you. We need to get Sisters of the Moon up on the Alaska tour and see what you ladies can find in our vast wilderness. But
Love it.
That would be awesome.
That would be awesome. It
That's
really would.
definitely a goal of ours.
Yeah, that would be a bucket list for sure.
it would be fantastic, and I'm sure that that trip with you ladies would be absolutely successful.
Um,
We know it's very difficult to coordinate schedules when there's multiple people. So, Matt and I want to thank you for your flexibility and your understanding as we all tried to coordinate. And we know your time is valuable. And thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us.
Thank y'all for having us.
yeah, we enjoy it. We love to talk about Bigfoot.
And we love hearing about it.
We can entertain you for a while.
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you so much. Such great stories. We haven't even begun to tap in to your knowledge and experience of all you've gained out in the field. So hopefully we'll have a chance to talk to you ladies again because you all three are amazing and a very important part of the Bigfoot research community and cryptid research community. So thank you for everything that you've invested and put into it.
Thank y'all.
Hey, it's our privilege. We love it.
Thank you so much. All right, for myself, CWR team member Daniel Becker in Anchorage, Alaska, for Matt Slater in Quincy, Washington, and for the Sisters of the Moon, great research team. Thank you so much for being with us and joining us. Have a good day.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Bye.